My mistake is I tend to overfeed my animals, but it's surprisingly easy to starve some of your animals as well. It can be very difficult to figure out just how much to feed your animals. So I've done a deep dive into feeding your animals on a homestead setting like this, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. If you go on the internet and Google how much to feed my chickens or whatever animal, you'll get a lot of different answers. So it can be really hard to know. Now, one reason for that is that the internet isn't really all that trustworthy. But another reason is that people are doing different things. For example, my mini pigs. If you're raising a mini pig to eventually become lunch one day, you want it to grow as fast as possible and fatten up quickly. But if this is a pet, a companion animal that's going to be sleeping on your couch, you'll probably want to keep it lean and small. These are two very different goals with very different feeding schedules. If you look on your bag of food, they'll probably give you a recommended feeding, and you can also look up academic literature, from agricultural school or something, and they'll have formulas for you to use. Now, these are usually the bare minimum amount of food to give your animal. Like if you're going on a diet, you'll sometimes hear BMR, basal metabolic rate. That's the bare minimum calories you should get on a diet. Same thing. Now, they figure this out in a laboratory setting. They have the animals in a lab, climate controlled, and they feed it an exact amount of food, and they'll examine the animal, they'll weigh it to check its growth or count its eggs or milk and other productivity. And then they'll also closely examine the poop. They'll see how much undigested food passes through and things like that. So it's very scientific. And this is great for industrial farms. You have hundreds of animals. They're isolated, fed individually. They're in a climate-controlled environment, and everything is very precise, which is the exact opposite of a homestead. First of all, you probably don't have a climate-controlled barn. The animals are kind of out in nature. So when it's very cold or very hot or very windy or any other adverse climates, they recommend giving your animal an extra 28%. So already you have to give it more than what they recommend on the packaging. Another thing is we tend to feed our animals together. Now, animals will fight for food. The big ones eat more than the little ones. They just bully them. And even if you portion it out into separate little dishes for all your animals, one for each animal, I've watched them. They usually all eat off the first dish until everything is empty. Then they all run over and eat off the second dish until everything is empty and keeps going. So they're always fighting for food. And unfortunately, the animals that need it most, the weakest or pregnant or smallest animal, usually gets the least amount of food. And if you're not watching carefully, you can have an overfed rooster and one of your hens ends up starving, which is, a tragedy. So you can counteract this by either feeding even more to make sure everybody gets fed, even if some of them are overeating, or, physically separate them. It can be difficult to tell if some of your animals are losing too much weight. Depends on the animal. You can recognize a skinny pig. I've seen some pigs for sale on Craigslist, and my goodness, they look like greyhounds. I say, that is a skinny pig. That's too skinny for a pig. But other animals like chickens, who can tell? If they're sick and their feathers are falling out and look a little ragged, you know something's wrong. But if they're just skinny, who can tell under all those fluffy feathers unless you're weighing your animals? So it's something to be aware of, something to pay attention to. But problems do arise, especially if your number of animals change. You have to be sure to change your feeding with it. Another option is self-regulating, allowing your animals to choose how much they eat in a day. And this is most popular if you're away and you want to kind of auto feed them. You can load up a hopper or other kind of feeder and let the animals eat as they see fit. This works better for some animals than others. For example, my chickens are a little fat. After I harvested them, their insides were filled with fat. So, not too fat where they couldn't walk or anything, which sometimes happens. But they had extra fat on them. They were eating more than they needed to. But I allow them to free range in the summer. And they filled up on bugs. We have lots of bugs in the desert. You wouldn't think so, but lots of ants, lots of termites, little lizards they can eat. And they ate so many bugs that they stopped eating the food, even though I was putting pellets out for them. So that's encouraging. They did self-regulate a little bit. My goats did something similar. In the wet climate, when there's lots of food for them to graze, they will eat less of the goat feed that I give them. But they still overeat a little bit. They like the taste of sweet feed and things like that. Alfalfa is tastier than some of these pungent desert plants. So they will overeat a little bit. Another thing is, much like us, if you get a new delicious food you haven't had in a while, you may overeat a little bit. And I've noticed my animals will do the same. So it's important to keep that in mind when changing their diet, either switching to a free range or just a new brand of food. Those first few days are not a good judge of how much they're going to eat. And other animals, like my pigs, don't seem to have a limit. They will eat and eat and eat. I was experimenting with my pigs, giving them more food and more food to see when they'll hit that point where they say, no thanks, I've had enough. And they never did. I was giving them 5 times the amount of food they should have been eating, which is crazy. And why do we care? Why am I paying so much attention to this? Well, there's a couple reasons. If an animal is too fat or too skinny, it's going to be unhealthy, and we don't want that. It's going to suffer. But the other reason is economics. If you're free ranging, you can let the animal eat whatever it wants. Doesn't matter. But if you're buying feed in the winter or year round, that hits the wallet pretty quickly. And if you're selling these animals and products, it can quickly become unprofitable if you're overfeeding. And even if you're eating it or using it yourself, you can calculate just how many dollars per pound this meat ends up costing you. And it can be quite expensive if you're overfeeding. So it is definitely a high priority concern. Thanks for watching. My name's Joe. This is my channel, Off Grid Solitude. If you like this kind of content, please consider liking and following and subscribing, because it really helps out my channel. And I'll see you next time.